Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from simpleprogrammer.com. So I got an interesting question about having your rent raised and what to do about it. I thought I'd address this since there's a couple of different interesting points here. And this question is, I'm not going to say the name just to keep it anonymous here, but it's from one of my favorite question askers. And he says, John, I need your advice with something. We had a new company take over our apartment complex and they're trying to increase my rent by 26%. They gave us a letter at our door and said we have 3 weeks to decide. We really like it where we live, but it's a pretty large amount, and everyone who's been here paying on time for years has gotten them. They're basically forcing us out for college kids to stuff in 4 into an apartment at $650 each kid per month. Would love your help. I looked into the legal side, and since we're on a month-to-month contract, they can basically raise it whenever they want, but they're supposed to give 30 days notice, which they failed to do. So there's a couple of things here. I think, first of all, I would say, looking at the legal side of this, I mean, I'm going to go on one of my pet peeves here, which is that I don't think there should be restrictions so much. I mean, okay, if you've got a contract and you're supposed to give 30 days notice, that's fine, right? You know, they need to abide by that. But as far as this being unfair, that some landlord would raise your rent on you, you know, I'll be a little bit harsh here, but that's not unfair at all. That's what we want. We want this ability for people who own stuff, who own real estate, who own land, who own an asset to be able to use that asset however they want. Now, contract is contract, right? That doesn't mean that they can just do whatever they want and break contracts. But, you know, the idea of it being unfair, or, you know, landlords shouldn't be able to raise rent, or that's, you know, treating people poorly, whatever, that's bullshit. They should be able to maximize the profits. This is their asset. They paid money. I think a lot of people don't understand that landlords, right, you know, you see the big bad apartment complex owner and you think that's some big corporation, even if it is, but let's put that aside. I own complexes, right? I mean, I own apartments and buildings, and for a long time I owned units where I was paying the mortgage on it, and it was costing me money out of my pocket while I was working a full-time job trying to get out of the rat race. So there's a lot of people in that situation, and to try and handicap a person like that and say, oh, they can't, you know, they can't raise their rents, and to, you know, the kind of ridiculous laws that we have in some cities like New York City and in San Francisco, where we have rent caps and all of this kind of bullshit. That's horrible. That's horrible. It's against free market. It doesn't make sense. It's restricting the rights of a property owner. We don't want our rights to be restricted like that. I think that's horrible. It's against the entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's a very scarcity mindset. Let other people take care of us type of mindset, and so I think we need to avoid that. So I want to start off by talking about that. I know that's not really answering the question of what should you do in that situation, but in a way it is, right? And I'll tell you why. The reason why it is because it's about, you got to start with the right mindset. If your mindset is, this is a big bad corporation raising my rent on my apartment, you know, this apartment complex owner, and this isn't fair, and how am I going to find a legal way that they can't do this to me, and I want to hold them back that way, you're not going to be thinking in the right mindset. If you do negotiations, they're going to go wrong because you're villainizing your opponent. When you villainize your opponent, you're going to do the opposite of what you should do. So I'm going to recommend a really good book here, and then I'm going to talk about some strategies. So the book that I'm going to recommend, and it even talks about negotiating this exact scenario, okay? I'm going to deviate slightly from the advice, but it is called Never Split the Difference. You can check it out here. I actually did a review on it, and it's one of those books that I listened to the audio version of it, and I immediately listened to it again, second time. That doesn't happen very often, but it's that good of a book, and I'll probably listen to it a third time. I'll probably listen to it this year. It'll probably be one of those books I listen to every single year because it's so good. But okay, I think enough with the politics of Randy. Again, that's my pet peeve because, and the reason why is because, like I said, I was struggling. I was making smart moves, making investments, buying properties, and working a regular job, and like doing all. It was not easy. Okay, busting my butt and paying money out of my pocket when I was cash flow negative on some of these properties as I was learning how to invest in real estate. If you're interested in my real estate investment stuff, you can check out the playlist here. I've got a course also on Simple Programmer, but that's not what I want to talk about today. So anyway, that's why I am invested in this. It kind of pisses me off when people are, against the landlord, because hey, it's someone that's trying to improve their life in many cases, and even if it is a corporation, so what? So what? Right? That doesn't help your situation, and trying to attack from a legal perspective and use archaic draconian laws to fight your case. Not a good way. I don't want to. I want to defend myself fairly. So let's talk about that. So basically, well, I want to talk about one more thing, and then I'll talk about this. I think what the landlord, and this is kind of related, right? So I think what the landlord is doing is stupid by trying to raise the rent on existing tenants and replace them with college students that they're going to rent out for $650 each kid per month, and stuff a whole bunch in there. And I'll tell you why. Because what they're doing is they're turning their passive investment into an active investment that is going to have into a business that's going to require a lot more work in maintenance and overhead, right? If you've got tenants in there, they're just paying the rent on time. It's very passive. The management that you can have to do that is very small. You can just have a property management company like I do. I've got 26 units, 27 units right now, and I don't have to do much to manage those units, right? It's a very simple thing for me to have those units managed for me. But when you rent by the room, now you've got a ton of problems. Now it's not so easy, especially college kids and that kind of strategy. Yes, you're making more money, but it's like doing a short-term rental versus a long-term rental, and it will be short-term. Why am I saying this? One, just for your knowledge, like, don't take something that's passive, right? Something has a much higher value when it's automated, even if it generates you less profit than if it's manual and it requires a lot of work and effort on your part and has a high liability. I'd rather take automated things, right? In fact, as I build Simple Programmer, as I'm in business, one of the kind of key strategies for Simple Programmer is that whatever we can do, it's not about making the most profit, it's about making the most profit on the most automated way possible, where we maximize automation, because that's the biggest thing. Is if I can do more with less people, right, that scales, whereas the manual things that have high liability don't. Now, can we get into actually answering the question, John? Yes, we can do that now. What should you do in this situation? So the first thing, there's a couple of things, and I'll look at it from a landlord's perspective, is that they've got this plan. They want to bring in the college students. They want to make more money on the thing. But every landlord knows that stability is important, and turnover really hurts you, and vacancy hurts you, right? So what I would attempt to do is I would go in and I would use some of the tactics from that book, Never Split the Difference, that I talked about. But I would try and set up a meeting with the landlord or the management company, try to find the decision maker, and just ask for some time, right? And what I would do is I would come in, and I wouldn't come from the perspective of, I can't afford to pay this rent, what you got to help me out. But I would come in from the perspective of, this is what you're suggesting, and if you do this action, I'm going to be stuck. I'm going to be in this situation where I'm going to have to make a choice here. But what I would be willing to do, I really like this place, right? I'd come in and I'd compliment them and say, I really like your apartments. I love how you're managing it. It's an excellent job, right? Give all these compliments. And then I would say something along the lines of, what would make this a better deal? What would make this a good deal for you? What are your concerns? What is your motive behind raising this rent? And you could find out some information about them. They might say, the college students, and you could talk about that, and you could address the college student issue in a way that doesn't like totally defeat the plan, but kind of leads in that direction. You could just start asking some smart questions, like, so I noticed that you've got some units where you've got like 4 of the rooms that you've got for rent for $650 per student? Are you going to rent some of these to college students as some of the tenants move out, right? So you're taking a very neutral position, and then they're going to answer that question, and then you're going to ask another question and say, that's interesting. What do you think that the turnover rate might be on those college students? Or like, are you, or ask questions like, are you going to charge them a higher deposit because, you know, if the liability of, are you afraid that they might damage the property? Don't say aren't you, say are you afraid? Because if you say aren't you, you're leading, then they're going to come back negative. But, or what are your fears or concerns? You could even ask that about renting to college students. I might be a little bit concerned myself, but I'm curious, you know, why you make that choice. And so lead them in that direction so they have a little bit of self-doubt in the decision they're making. Then you come in with your offer. Then you say something like, look, here's the thing. I've been paying for, you know, establish your credibility. I've been paying rent on time for a long time. I'm a good tenant. I, you know, take care of the place. Unfortunately, this rent increase is going to be an increase that is going to force me to look somewhere else. But I don't really have time for that. Here's what I would suggest. Would you be open to hear a suggestion that I have? Okay, give them a chance to say yes. What if I paid rent in advance, or I signed a longer term lease? What could I potentially do that would make it worth your while to keep me as a tenant? That's a good question, right? And then what you're going to do from that point is you're going to be able to negotiate much easier, because you got to figure out what do they want, right? And as you're asking these questions, again, this is very situational, but as you're asking these questions about what they're trying to achieve with raising the rents or renting it out to the college students, you're not only going to plant some doubts in their plan, but you're going to see what their objective is. And that's how you're going to kind of phrase your questions and what you're going to do, because there might be more involved, right? A lot of times when people get into negotiations, they think it's just about money, but it's not just about money. There's always some other objectives. And so if you can figure out what the other objectives are, right? Maybe they're trying to decrease vacancy rate. Maybe they're trying to make more profit from their property, right? It's not just about, I'm trying to get this amount of rent, this 26% increase. Then you can negotiate on those terms, and you can have the money terms. So you could potentially, you know, as a landlord myself, I would rather, it's going to be difficult for me to say no to someone who's willing to sign a year lease or a 2-year lease, especially if you're on a month to month. And you could talk about that. A lot of times a month to month contract is going to be more expensive, right? So you could talk about those things and ask questions around that area and start negotiating. And, you know, honestly, if it is such that they have a plan, that they're set on this plan, that they're going to rent these out to college students, and they're going to make $1,000 or $2,000 more a month, whatever it is, you're probably not going to sway them. You're probably not going to sway them. But the fact that they offered a 26% rent increase, right, instead of 100% rent increase on you, means that there's still there's a point where they think it's worth it to have you in there, and you got to figure out what that is. What are the circumstances so that you can negotiate that better? But yeah, it's one of those, you may not win the negotiation. You may not end up getting what you want, but the other thing you can do, one other thing is you can throw it back and you can say, how am I supposed to pay this increased rent, right? This is one of those strategies from that book, Never Split the Difference, is you start asking that question. Let them negotiate against themselves. How do you expect me to pay this? Right? and let them answer that very open-ended question, and oftentimes the person will negotiate against themselves. But ultimately, it's going to come down to you figuring out, what do they want? What do they get out of this? What can you offer? And probably the best thing as a landlord myself that you can offer is that you can offer an extended lease, that you're going to lease it for a year, or that you're going to prepay some amount or something like that, and that's going to be the highest benefit. But come in there friendly, come in there complimenting them on the property, telling how much you like the property, and then asking some of these questions first from a very neutral perspective, and then see what you can do. And ultimately, if you can't do this, then you're just going to have to find something else, and maybe you'll find a better deal out there. But, you know, this is the market. 26% increase also, it's not a huge amount. I mean, maybe you just want to pay it. Maybe it's not worth the hassle. Maybe you pay it for now if you're on a month to month and you start looking, right, for another property. But don't waste your time in trying to find the legal or getting upset about this. Like, I mean, this is business. And so treat it like business. If it's worth it to you to try and negotiate this, if you think that money is going to be worth it, then go in there and negotiate it. Otherwise, just make more money. That's the better way. That's the best way to solve a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems in life that I solve just by making more money instead of chasing after some stupid, increase or some money. Just make more, right? Figure out some way to compensate for that, and that can often be a better solution than wasting a bunch of time. Because a lot of times trying to save money requires the same amount of effort as trying to make money, but trying to make money gets you more, right? So sometimes there's the same amount of effort, I guess I'd say, in trying to save $100 as there is in trying to make an extra $200 a month. So which activity is more beneficial? Trying to save $100 or trying to make $200 more a month? If you got to choose the one to make more money. Anytime you have those choices of time. Now there are times when that's not true, and that's what you got to figure out here. That's the main question I'd be asking myself. So there you go. That's all I got to say about that. I know I went on a lot of different tangents there, but I think there's a lot of things to consider here. This is a pretty good question because there's a lot of pieces here to think about, and just how you're going to operate your life. Like, are you going to let things like this totally derail you, and you're going to get really upset and emotional about this and try to get lawyers involved and all this? Or are you just going to realize that, this is just a situation, just something you're going to have to deal with, and you've got choices in it, right? You can accept it, you can negotiate, right? Or you can do something about it that you have within your control, which is possibly making more money, right? There's choices that you have, but ultimately, the most destructive choice that you can do is to, waste a huge amount of time on a fairly small rent increase. I mean, it's not 26%. Okay, it's decent. It's the fourth increase, but the worst thing you can do is waste a whole bunch of time and get into legal battles and get emotionally invested and get really upset about this instead of just figuring out a better solution. So figure out a solution to your problem. Hope that helps you. If you like this video, don't forget to click that subscribe button below, and I will talk to you next time. Take care.